Our good friend Dr. Fauci, yesterday, Buck, we played this clip of Dr. Fauci saying, in no uncertain terms, the pandemic is over. Listen to this.
We are certainly right now in this country out of the pandemic phase. Namely, we don't have 900,000 new infections a day and tens and tens and tens of thousands of hospitalizations and thousands of deaths. We are at a low level right now. So if you're saying, are we out of the pandemic phase in this country? We are. What we hope to do, I don't believe, and I've spoken about this widely, we're not going to eradicate this virus. If we can keep that level very low and intermittently vaccinate people, and I don't know how often that would have to be, Judy. That might be every year, that might be longer, in order to keep that level low. But right now, we are not in the pandemic phase in this country.
We're not in a pandemic. Could not have been any more clear. That is Dr. Fauci to PBS. Jen Psaki was asked about Dr. Fauci's comments, and she was not pleased. This is Psaki yesterday.
Dr. Fauci said on the PBS NewsHour last night, quote, "This country is out of the pandemic phase of COVID." What phase are we in right now? And also, if we are out of the pandemic phase, why are emergency measures still in place?
What Dr. Fauci was saying is that we are in a different phase of this pandemic, and that's absolutely true. So there's no question that we're in a different moment in our fight against COVID. But we also know COVID isn't over, and the pandemic isn't over. We are still seeing people get very sick from COVID and cases of COVID, and we have measures that we should all continue to take to protect ourselves.
It's never over if this is the philosophy, right? We know this. There's actually never a time where we will be truly out of the pandemic there are still people who are getting sick. There are still people. That is true of a variety of illnesses every single day all across the country. And we're not going to be able to cure all of those illnesses either. Remember, COVID mostly goes after people who are over 75 years of age, who are already susceptible to a whole range of other illnesses, too. When I say goes after, it mostly is a risk to them. Clay, Moderna is pushing for a new emergency vaccine approval. I'm assuming, although I don't know, is it for Omicron? Because we know that Omicron just blew through the initial, it did not get slowed down. That's why we had all-time record cases in this country and many countries after the mass vaccination campaign. They're pushing through emergency status Moderna vaccination, a new one, for kids under the age of 6. I cannot believe, but I will tell you this. I think that because I don't want to overstate the Twitter thing, but I do think the tide is shifting. I think you see it too, right? I think we're here realizing that there is a swing back to sanity. I want to say I think we're helping
part of it.
We're not no big deal, but I think we're part of it. There's a swing back towards sanity that's going on, but we're not done yet. Clay, what are the actual risk numbers to a child under 6 dying from COVID? Because it doesn't stop the kid giving it to the vaccine, does not stop the spread. So that's off the table. What are the chances? Is it 1 in a million? And I think it actually is perhaps even less than 1 in a million. What are the real chances?
Yes. The real chances are, I drove my kids to school this morning, Buck. My kids were more likely to die in a traffic accident with me driving them to school this morning. My kids are more likely to drown. My kids are more likely to be struck by lightning. We are talking about awful things that could happen, certainly to children, but crazily unlikely. And the data here, too, even from the CDC, 75% of all kids right now have COVID antibodies. That means they've had COVID and recovered from it. That's not meaning that they got the COVID shot. That means that they have had COVID and they've recovered from it. Probably my kids. Strong probability that it's your kids out there as you're listening as well. They've already had it. And so the idea that you're going to get these shots on an emergency basis for kids younger than 6, to me, Buck, is pure madness. And by the way, on that Psaki clip, I wanted to play those basically back to back so you could see how much she was lying, right? Because credit to whoever asked that question in the White House press corps. But she accurately said, Fauci said the pandemic's over. Now, Fauci then flip-flopped and said he wasn't saying the pandemic was over after he got his knee or his hand slapped by the White House here. But how can you trust a guy who one day says there's a pandemic and the next day says there isn't?
You know, there was the funeral of Madeleine Albright yesterday at the National Cathedral in D.C., which honestly I only know about because they put it on TV for a few minutes, and then I think they realized, you know, there's like a massive war in Europe. We've got big problems in the country. There are other news stories that certainly moved ahead of it very, very rapidly. I'm not sure that the funeral is a news story particularly, or not a high profile one really. But what was interesting watching the feed for a minute, Clay, is that Biden in the church is masked up.
Yeah.
He puts the mask on to walk around, goes up to the pew to say a few words, and then puts the mask on again when he walks off. You look at the front row, the Obamas were there. I mean, it was Democrat royalty, right? All the biggest Democrats, the Clintons are there. They're all masked up. And I'm sitting here saying they're all vaccinated. The mask mandate has been dropped. You don't have to do this anymore. None of them are living their lives as though they need to be masked in indoor settings, except when there are cameras around. Except when all of a sudden there's some moment of personal branding that they can take from this. I guarantee you, it's funny. Clay and I both lived in D.C. How many of the people that were at that funeral yesterday, biggest names in the Democrat Party, went to brunch at like Cafe Milano afterwards, sat there for 2 hours in a packed restaurant. That place is always packed. No mask on. I'm sure a large percentage of them.
Or you went to somebody's house in Georgetown and you didn't have a mask on. And by the way, Fauci, while Biden and Mayor Pete and a lot of other Democrat elites are going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Fauci's been twice shot up with the COVID shot and gotten 2 boosters already. He doesn't think it's safe to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He really should be pressed on this, Buck. If he doesn't feel like it's safe after 4 shots to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, what would have to occur for Fauci to feel safe going back to his normal life?
This is a brilliant point, because what you see is that the essence of Fauciism is to maintain maximum control at all times over the public under the guise of health, when really the only times that you will allow greater freedom and individual liberty are the natural cycles of the virus when they go down for a period of time before they come up. You are never going to be, based on Fauci's logic here, you are never done free, go back to normal life. It's always a temporary removal of the restriction, because otherwise, how do you justify? I mean, he's saying, well, there are still cases and there's still... Yeah. Well, so then when are we not at cases? I mean, notice he's always resisted giving when can we be done as a number, because then he'd be stuck with it.
And also, why not press him on, hey, you've gotten 4 shots and you're not willing to go to an indoor event. Are you not going to one for the rest of your life? What would you have to see to be comfortable to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner? I mean, I'd love to know the answer to that, because I don't know that he can give an answer, Buck, that would in any way reflect that he's ever going to return for the rest of his life to his normal pre-COVID existence.